Today, with the first pick, we're grading the AFC and NFC North 2024 draft classes. Got the same questions for you, Rick. Did these teams address their biggest needs? How many year one starters did they find? And as you giggle, would we have done anything differently had we been making those picks as they came off the board? We'll talk about all that and more. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's Rick Spielman. This is episode 158. Let me find my clicker, Rick. How many days to the 2025 NFL draft?
Ryan and our guest producer today, Harry, you know there are only 345 days left until the 2025 NFL draft.
You got it. And Ricky asked about my hat. Since we have producer Harry admirably stepping in for Debo as he takes a much-needed break. If you're listening, I did air quotes with the much-needed. I got my Harry Mack hat on.
Oh, that's Harry Mack.
Rick's a Harry Mack fan. I'm a Harry Mack fan. I don't know if Harry knows Harry Mack, but his name's Harry. So we're all we're celebrating Harry today, Rick.
Okay, I did not know that. I listened to some Harry Mack instant raps on the street this morning as I was walking my dog. Yo.
All right. If you haven't checked out Harry Mack, check him out. He'll make your day brighter. All right. 3:45 until the next draft. In the meantime, in case you missed it, we've already hit the AFC, NFC West, AFC, and NFC South draft grades earlier this month. You can check that out in the old podcast feed. And we'll be going through the East Division later this week. Before you know it, Rick, it'll be summer scouting series time.
Yeah, I can't wait to start scouting or doing film again. We haven't had a break yet.
I've had a little break. You've been watching film the last week, have you?
Nah, this week I did. I took off.
So yeah, I did not
watch film this
sort
week.
of nice.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to have 1 week off of not watching tape. But
yeah,
usually in the scouting world, you get about a month and a half before you start grinding it at the end of June and beginning of July again to get ready for the upcoming 2025 draft, which is only 345 days away. So I looked at it as like a giant redwood, and you just take one chop at a time. And it takes about 9 months to get there, but you just keep hacking away at the amount of guys that you have to look at.
You look like a guy who would drive into the Pacific Northwest and chop down a 400-year-old tree. Yeah. Me, I would have said the longest journey starts with the first step, but you're out there chopping down trees.
Now, I love trees. We have trees here. My wife loves trees. So please, if you have any issues, I am not a tree hater. I'm a tree lover.
You're a tree hugger. All right. Yeah. And by the way, you can leave us a 5-star review, an Apple Podcast, and leave a question for an upcoming mailbag. And Rick or I will be happy to answer it. All right. Let's get to it. AFC North time, baby. Let's start with the Ravens. I gave him an A.
I gave him a B.
And Rick, you gave him a B as I look over the grades here. I lost my sheet of paper for a second. So quickly, you can see here if you're watching this on YouTube, Nate Wiggins was their pick at 30. Then they got Roger Rosengarten, the right tackle from Washington, and he's Isaac, the edge rusher out of Penn State, Tez Walker in round 4, the burner straight line guy out of UNC. And I'll mention TJ Tampa there, and then we'll get into the conversation here. Round 4 out of Iowa State. You talked about TJ Tampa during the draft process as possibly a day 2 guy, maybe even a second round guy. And I saw some quotes from Mr. DaCosta, Eric DaCosta, the GM for the Ravens. And number one, they didn't think that Nate was going to be there at 30. They thought he was a top 20 pick. They also liked Cooper DeJean and Kool-Aid McKinstry, who they would have considered there had Nate not been there. They had a day 2 grade on TJ Tampa. And they actually admitted this. I want to get your thoughts on this before we get into the conversation. Eric admitted that we would have taken him a lot higher, TJ, that is, had they not taken Nate already, because they doubled down. And that's not uncommon to get 2 positions if you need 2 positions. But is that a thing where you might have, if you had a day 2 grade on TJ, maybe you take him in round 3, but since you had Nate Wiggins, you felt comfortable addressing another need? In this case, it was Tez Walker.
Yeah, no, I think they needed to address the receiver position, but I think and Eric does a great job following his board. And when TJ's sitting there in the 4th round, even though you drafted Nate Wiggins in the 1st round, you cannot pass up a player on your board that's probably sitting that high, especially if you had him to develop there. I really like TJ Tampa. I know he does have some stiffness, but I think he's going to fit in their scheme well. And I think he can be physical and run support. And I think he's going to be a very good zone cover guy. The biggest concern I have he's almost the opposite of Nate Wiggins, who may be the best man cover guy, fastest guy at the position in this draft, but probably not as physical and lacks the strength that maybe a TJ Tampa has. Well, there's probably almost a 30-pound swing difference between the two as well. But two different types of corners. But what Baltimore has always done, especially under Mike McDonald, is that they find ways to use player strengths. So I wouldn't be surprised if TJ ends up playing some safety as well. So they can utilize Kyle Hamilton the way they did at different parts of the field and have him blitz off different things, because that's a nightmare for offensive coordinators, the way they use Hamilton and the way they move him around from position to position. So TJ may still play at corner, but if they end up needing a safety, I think he is physical enough to play safety as well.
Zach Gore is the defense coordinator replacing Mike McDonald. They have Marlon Humphrey. He's battled injuries. He's been around the block a few times at cornerback. And Brandon Stevens' contract's going to be up at the end of next season. So those additions make a ton of sense there. I'm guessing we answered the question I'm trying to ask every time we talk about this team. They answered the biggest question: defensive back, right?
Yeah, they had to get defensive back help. I don't know, if Tez Walker is going to fill the receiver need, since OBJ went down and signed with Miami. There's some natural talent there. We talked about it at the Senior Bowl. He had issues catching the ball. Caught the ball much better when we were down at his pro day at North Carolina. There's no question about his straight line speed and to take the top off of coverages. He just needs to be more consistent, and maybe that'll come because, if you remember, he missed half the season, I believe, just because of some NCAA violation, which is just, you can pay guys $1 million, but if they have some kind of minor NCAA violation, we're going to sit them for first half of the season.
Ridiculous. Yeah, you want to move to be close to your grandmother. That's an issue. Roger Rosengarten in round 2. I thought he had a really good season, except for the last couple snaps in that final game that they played against in the finals against Michigan. He struggled there, but he's penciled in as a starter in the unofficial depth chart I'm looking at. They traded Morgan Moses, of course. Daniel Failele from Minnesota, who you probably remember from back in the day because he could block out the sun, is also number 2 in the depth chart. I guess you just see what happens in the coming weeks and months before you determine who the right tackle is, right?
Yeah, they go in. The evaluation process starts now. It started when they came in for the rookie mini camp. We used to have weekly personnel meetings after a week of OTAs because personnel doesn't stop. As the coaches get these guys in the meeting rooms, as they start to get an opportunity to work with them on the field, you're trying to identify needs as well that maybe you haven't been able to fill yet. You look at some of the veterans, you're seeing some of the veterans signed now that are currently on the street or that are taking some visits. But if you identify that, hey, right tackle, I don't know, Rosengarten, we love his upside, but he may not be ready yet, that you potentially look out on the street, and it becomes extremely important as we get talking further down the road, once we get into training camp and the final cut downs at the 53-man roster and how you work those boards as well.
Let me ask you this: as a GM, you're not sitting in, or maybe you are you sitting in the day-to-day meetings about who's starting and who's not? Are you more concerned about, hey, coach says I need a right tackle, and then we go search the streets for a right tackle?
No, it's I sat in the meetings all the time. I wanted to listen to the coaches. I had our front office sit in there, our directors, just so they knew. I needed to make sure that our college scouts knew, because they become pro scouts at times during the preseason process, because they're going to be watching tape as well. So everybody needed to be on the same page as we sit there and listen to the coaches. They're talking about how he's doing in the meetings. The strength coach is talking about what he sees down in his area. So everybody kind of is evaluating these guys. And as you get closer to training camp or at the end of the OTAs and the final mini camp, you continue to look. But you're always going to try to turn the bottom end of your roster over. So it never really ends, even when you go on vacation for a couple weeks. If you can get a couple weeks off, you're always sitting there looking and trying to evaluate on how you can get your roster better.
The last time you went on vacation, I think you went on the roller coaster and you turned your phone off. When you got off the roller coaster, you had 50 messages or something, right?
Yeah, it was horrible. I took 3 days off to go to Lake Tahoe.
How
And
dare you?
yeah, I didn't have we were whitewater rafting.
Oh, that's what it was. You went whitewater rafting.
Yeah, couldn't take my phone on the white for 3
That's
hours.
what it was.
And
all right. So let me ask you this. I gave the Ravens an A for one reason only, and that's because they drafted Devin Leary in the 6th round, which gave me the victory in the $1 bets. So that's why they got an A for me. Why did you give them a B?
I just thought it was steady. I do recognize Nate Wiggins' cover skills, but I don't think he's complete. I don't know if Rosengarten's ready to step in at right tackle yet.
Gotcha.
Adisa Isaac should give them some edge stuff, but he's kind of a straight line, still needs development and still needs to develop a pass rush arsenal, though he has a physical traits as a pass rusher off the edge that you like for Walker. Like we talked about, the inconsistent hands, and guy I liked was TJ Tampa, and just to see how he develops. So I think it was a steady. I don't know, besides maybe Nate Wiggins, but I'm still want to see how that turns out, if they really got a day one starter out of this entire class.
All right, quickly, we'll rip through these and we'll move on. Would you rather Nate Wiggins at 30, or you could have had still on the board Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry?
I like Kool-Aid McKinstry, and I like Cooper DeJean. I recognize Nate Wiggins' talent and man coverage. I just would have went probably with the little bigger bodies and a little bit more. I think those two are more ready to start than maybe Nate Wiggins is.
And then Roger Rosengarten also on the board. The very next pick, by the way, Kingsley Sumatea went to the Chiefs. He's a right tackle / left tackle out of BYU. Caden Wallace went a few picks later to the Patriots. He's a right tackle. Kieran Amagaje went a few picks after that. He's a developmental left tackle, if you want, out of the Bears. Any of those guys you like better than Rosengarten?
No, I think they're all. That's where the run starts.
Yeah.
No. So that's when GMs follow their board, and Rosengarten was probably the top of the remaining tackles, or they would have took someone else. So, but it's amazing when you do watch the draft unfold, just like you went through there. Once one goes and you see that the list is starting to get thin, then you see a run on the position like we saw at tackle.
And that's a nice little segue to the Cleveland Browns, who didn't pick until pick 52 because, of course, of the Deshaun Watson trade. And they started at the top there with the defensive lineman, and there had been a run on defensive linemen, so I'm sure they were waiting on pins and needles. Michael Hall Jr., who you know well from Ohio State, Jim Schwartz, defensive coordinator, was presumably extremely happy to get him there. You gave the Browns a B. I gave the Browns a B-, and this has more to do with the fact that they haven't had a first-round pick and the Deshaun Watson there than anything else. I think they did a pretty good job with what they were left with, not picking first until late in the second round. Michael Hall Jr. is undersized, but let me see. Jim Schwartz had some comments on exactly how they plan to use him, and that's basically what you've been saying for months now. He's just going to be a twitched-up inside guy, designated interior pass rusher, which does exist according to you. And when he went off the board, Rick, there had been 6 defensive linemen started the run at the top of the second round with Rook Ororo when we saw the Falcons trade up to get him. So 20-something picks later, Michael Hall Jr. goes off the board. And I'm guessing this isn't the reason you gave him a B.
No, I think they have a pretty complete roster. They didn't have first-round pick. They've done a lot. They traded for Judy this year to add to the receiver room. So they're kind of built to win right now. By the way that Andrew Berry has put together this roster, it's all going to depend on Deshaun Watson anyway. But I think this was a good value pick. I don't think he's a full 17 game, let's say 60 snap starter. But I do think if you bring him in, plus the age, it's a defensive tackle position for the Cleveland Browns. There, I believe 3 of the 4 or all 4 are in their 30s. So they need to get some youth up front. And I think he'll be end up developing into a role as an inside nickel pass rusher, which should help their horses, including Myles Garrett coming off the edge.
Speaking of age, Michael Hall doesn't turn 21 until a few more weeks. So they got some value there as well. They also got Juwan Briggs with their 7th round pick out of Cincinnati. I went back and looked at my thing that I wrote for CBS Sports. He was my best value. I thought he played a lot better than 7th round pick, but either way, they got him there. The next pick, though, in round 3, Zach Zenner, who got injured last year along the offensive line for Michigan, part of that group of guys that felt like every single player that took a snap got drafted last year from Michigan. I wanted to run this by you. This is from you talked about GM Andrew Berry. He said this about Zenner, who played primarily right guard. He said, very rarely will we bring in a lineman and have him work at just one spot, especially young players who want them to have position flexibility. So Zenter's also been working at center, or he will be when he's completely healthy. Is that something that you think about as well when you're putting these rosters together with young guys that probably won't start right away? Let's get them on the 53-man roster by getting the flexibility there.
Yeah, if they're not slated to start right away as a day one starter, then they have to learn how to cross-train because you only have 7 or maybe 8 offensive linemen active on game day. So one's going to be a swing tackle, one's going to be a swing interior player. Zach Zenner, to me, was maybe one of the most polished as far as technically sound guards coming out in this year's draft. I think he slipped because of the significant injury he had at the end of the season. But now that he has time to probably redshirt a year or is not going to be asked to come in and compete for a starting job right away, then I think it's great that you try to start cross-training these guys, because if he's a starter, he'll end up playing at a guard or center. But if he's a backup and he's going to be active on game days, he has to be able to swing and do both.
So their next pick, I want to get your thoughts on this. We know we've talked about stacking the board forever, so I sort of know the answer. But they got Jamari Thrash in round 5. They didn't have a 4th round pick. And I'm just wondering if you want to add a little depth, and maybe that wasn't a huge consideration because you talked about they have Jerry Jeudy. They do have Elijah Moore and Amari Cooper, but they drafted Jamari Thrash with that 5th round pick. Got Seth Tillman last year as well, who we talked about. So maybe this wasn't as big a need as perhaps I'm making it out to be. But you had an opportunity to get Jalen McMillan as opposed to the Zach Zenner pick if you wanted to. You could have gotten Luke McCaffrey, who went to the very end of the 3rd round to the San Francisco 49ers, or to the Commanders, excuse me. Troy Franklin was still there, but maybe the need wasn't as big as I'm making it out to be, because they do have some depth there, and they had more immediate needs at along the offensive line in terms of depth. But, I mean, these are the conversations you're having in the weeks leading up, and if your draft board's your draft board, you're not going to vary from that.
Yeah, no, it's your draft board, and you're talking 5th, 6th, 7th round. You're taking guys that are best on your draft board. You're not so worried as much about need. You are if you have another position equal to Thrash, but if he's sitting there on your board, then you're taking best available as you go down through there.
All right, why'd you give him a B? Because of the lack of picks, especially 1st round?
I think lack of picks, and then I think that I don't think any of these guys are all future. I don't think anyone's going to come in immediate help. Maybe Michael Hall will as an interior pass rusher. Other than that, I didn't see anyone really coming in and being a significant contributor next year. So I think these guys are all kind of developmental guys that may become starters down the road. Who knows, 3 years from now.
Right.
But I think just because of their roster is pretty complete, that a lot of this was a developmental draft for me.
But you talked about it, that the way the roster is constructed, they were pretty good last year. They're lacking a quarterback, and that'll be the big decider of how good they are next season anyway. So we'll have to wait and see how Deshaun Watson plays, but everything else, they've checked a lot of boxes. All right, Rick, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about a team in Ohio, and then probably the best team on planet Earth in the AFC North right after this.
2 big boys getting ready to play. Big being the operative word here. And here they come.
All right. Just so you know, producer Harry, Rick does not get pluses or minuses, so that's why his draft grades are by the book. I gave the Bengals a B+. You gave them just a B. If I interpret that means a B+ in normal people language.
No, it just means a B.
It starts with
a C, or you don't pass.
It starts with Amarius Mims at 18. And after the draft, the Bengals admitted they didn't think that Amarius was going to be there because there had been that run on offensive tackles. Offensive tackles are usually overvalued, so on and so forth. Director of college scouting, Mike Potts, said he felt that this is one of those, I know exactly how Rick's going to react comments, but I understand. He said, let me read the quote here. This is from The Athletic. Mike Potts stated that he knew on the drive from Tuscaloosa to the Atlanta airport after watching LSU win at Alabama that Joe Burrow was the number one pick in that draft. And that came 22 starts in his career into Joe Burrow's career. He believed the same thing about Amarius Mims after that one start in the playoffs against Ohio State. How does that strike you?
That's good, because a lot better than I can anticipate.
He played great in that game, though, right?
He did, but it's the consistency. The NFL is about consistency. It's not going up and down. You're good one game, you're bad. So the consistency, and there's just no track record for me. Do I recognize the unique height and the athleticism? Yes. Do I recognize being in a meeting room and the coach is coming in, just give me this dude, I will make him into a player, because I can't teach what he has. So I recognize everything that everybody sees in this guy. I recognize the upside and potential, but even at the combine, he got hurt and couldn't finish it. And it just bothers me that there's no consistency on him being on the field week in and week out.
And by the way, that's our buddy Paul Daner in The Athletic who wrote that story. You can check that out in The Athletic. Does a great job covering the Bengals. But you can understand, and you sort of touched on it. Well, let me ask you this, put it this way. 18, do you feel okay taking them at 18 if the Bengals given their needs?
Yeah. Well, who was left? I don't know who was left.
Who was left? Well, at 20, the Steelers took. Yeah, Fatani was still there because the Steelers took him at 20. Let me look real quick. Got to check my horizontal board. Steal it. I can't wait for next year's draft when I can just steal all your things. Fatani was still there. He was the last one to go. If you want, well, no, he wasn't. So Fatani, Jordan Morgan, Tyler Guyton were the first rounders.
Yep.
You okay with Mims there?
Yeah, I could see the upside. May have the biggest upside of all those.
Yeah.
Fatanu is he a left tackle, or I'm sure we're going to talk about him next. I can't imagine.
That's all we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, this is Steelers. So for the next hour, if you tune in, it'll be the Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
Final 5 minutes will be about the Dolphins. Harry's a Dolphins fan, so we got to give Harry some love there too. Second round, Chris Jenkins. We know his pedigree from his dad. Great young man by all accounts. There was not a bad thing to be said about him, anything that I read, and then folks that talked about him. I didn't love his tape as much, but maybe that's just a function of the defense he's played in. We've talked before about how sometimes Michigan asks players to do different things they may be asked to do in the NFL, especially on defense. Jermaine Burton. Let's talk about Jermaine Burton at round 3. Historically, the Marvin Lewis era especially, it felt like the Bengals were willing to take chances on players that may have had character concerns. There were some off-field issues with Burton. I don't know the specifics of them, but he fell to the 3rd round. He could have gone a round and a half higher perhaps. So you're doing the math on, can we keep him on the straight and narrow in addition to what he brings to the field? So how does that sort of work out over the course of the final month of the draft process?
Yeah, I think at this point in the draft, that it's worth taking, and it depends. Each team has a different tolerance level, whatever off-field issue they're dealing with. I don't know if Jermaine had off-field issues, if it was maturity issues, what it was that some people had concern with, but there's no question about his talent when you watch the tape.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought he took it a step up this year. There's no question about the speed, the athleticism, the ability to run routes. I think this guy has a lot of untapped potential. I think he's a more explosive player if he applies himself than Tyler Boyd, who I think is going to be he's trying to replace, and gives Joe Burrow another huge offensive weapon because he can make plays after the catch as well.
2 other weapons coming Joe Burrow's way are tight ends. Eric All, the tight end out of Iowa in the 4th round, which was, I thought, a couple rounds higher than I thought he would go. In his defense, he had a couple injuries he was dealing with, including an ACL. And then they got my guy Tanner McLaughlin in round 6, who also had a core muscle injury, and I thought he might go a couple rounds higher than he did. So 2 more tight ends. McLaughlin's a pretty good athlete. Eric All feels a little more in like tight endy, if you will. But I was reading some quotes from Christian Sarkisian, who is an area scout, the Midwest scout for the Bengals, and he was talking about Eric All. He has deep ties to the Big Ten in terms of background. I think he came from Northwestern, if I recall correctly. But he was talking about how much, when he talked to the Iowa people, here's his quote, Rick, and this will blow your hair back here. Sarkisian said they talk.
Don't even go with Laporta comparison.
Listen to this. So Sarkisian, this is what Sarkisian told the media. They talk about Eric All in the same way they do all the other Iowa tight ends. So he didn't name names, but that includes Sam Laporte and George Kittle. He was captain at Michigan because he transferred. He would have been captain at Iowa if he were there longer. He was really the only offense on that Iowa team this year. He's dynamic, physical run blocker, and he says we're getting a pretty darned polished player once we get him ready to roll, and that means once he's healthy. So that also goes to what you talk about all the time. Teams do a lot more than we do. And once someone's injured and we've only seen a handful of snaps in the games we may have seen, he may have been injured in, we didn't know. All those things are taken into consideration here. So they loved him. Maybe they liked him higher than here, and this feels like a steal based on sort of the reading between the lines.
Well, we'll find that out. But I'm sure he's an A-plus character. Most of those kids coming out of Iowa are. They all have passion for the game. They seem to have better NFL careers than when they do come out of Iowa.
Really do.
So I recognize the upside. I just think he's more of a blocking tight end than a legit mismatch receiving tight end, but he should be able to have. I thought your guy was maybe a little bit more, had more playmaking ability in the passing game than Eric Hall did, but they got two good young tight ends.
Yeah, that's how I felt about it too. But again, it's funny that you talk about probably A+ off the field. One of the observations Sarkisian noted is that the joy with which Eric Hall played the game, like he was a high school kid having fun. So that sort of checks that box too. How about that? These Iowa kids. All right, so you gave them a B. I felt like they got at least one starter, and Amarius Mims. I don't know if he's a day one guy, but I think you try to find out. Trent Brown's obviously the right tackle there as well. But after that, I don't know if they have any guys going to contribute consistently right away. Maybe that's the plan. But I mean, do you?
Yeah, I think Chris Jenkins, because they lost DJ Reader, they needed some interior line help, and he is a very solid player. He's a jack of all trades, maybe not a master of none. I think that's the term that everybody uses, but really good run player, can create some pressure, but he's not unique. But he is a solid guy that you can line up and help you win games, but he's not going to make a game-changing play, in my opinion. But he's going to help you win by the style that he plays with.
Steady as she goes. You can win with that too.
Steady as she goes. You need those guys.
Next up, your 2025 Super Bowl champion, Pittsburgh Steelers. A+ and an A. I'll let you guess who gave the plus. All right, Rick, why don't you take over this segment? You can tell me what you don't like about this draft class.
I thought it was a really good draft class. I think with both Fatanu and I think Zach Frazier have an opportunity if Zach is completely healthy. Both of them have ability to come in and start right away. I'm anxious to see. I don't know if you've seen anywhere they lined him up as they're keeping him at left tackle.
So I heard early on right tackle right now, but it's early. So Broderick Jones will move over to the left side, I think, is the preliminarily thinking.
Right. So I'll be anxious to see how it all ends and shakes up before they line up in week one opener. But they could have gotten two starting rookie offensive linemen, which was critical for them, especially with Arthur Smith and his new offense emphasis of running the ball, keep running the ball. And then I think Roman Wilson's going to be a major contributor in the slot because that was another big need for them that they definitely had to address.
Yeah, and the funny thing about the Steelers is historically rookies haven't played, going back more than a decade ago. And then slowly but surely, those players start finding their way into the field because of need. Are you having a heart attack? What's going on? You dropped your mic?
I dropped my mic.
So. I thought you were grabbing your chest like Fred Sanford. I thought this was the big one.
It's the big one, love. Now just the mic drop.
There's the mic drop. All right, so I'm looking back at the story that I read for CBS Sports right after the draft. Best value has to be Peyton Wilson, I think, third round.
If he's healthy.
If he's healthy. And he does, in fact, he confirmed or offered some clarification to the report a few weeks ago. He does, in fact, have an ACL in both knees, so he's not missing an ACL, in case you were wondering about that.
I wasn't.
Oh, okay. By the way, the trade. So the Steelers sent Kenny Pickett, a 2024 fourth-round pick, to the Eagles, and they got a third-round pick that they turned into Peyton Wilson. And then they have a 2025 seventh-round pick that'll determined by a bunch of stuff. The other pick that went to the Eagles was later traded, and that became Jalen Wright, who ended up at Harry's Dolphins there. So we'll see if that works out. But for now, I think Steelers fans are quite happy to have the quarterbacks they have and to have Peyton Wilson as well. The more Wilsons, the merry is what I always say, Rick. Mason McCormick, they also got in round 4. We talked about him throughout the draft process. He'll be depth right now, and I wonder if they're going to do with him the same that we're talking about Zach Zenter and the Browns. So you think they'll have him do a couple positions?
Yeah, I think they'll try him, but I think this guy's a little stiff to play center. In my opinion. But I do like his the style of play that he brings. Again, everything was tailored towards being a more physical football team, especially on the offensive side, and this kid will fit that bill.
Got a little defensive line depth with Logan Lee in round 6, and then later in round 6 they got Ryan Watts, the cornerback / safety. He's long. He ran pretty well. He's a little stiff, but we'll see where they decide to line him up. Early indications are that he's going to play corner, but maybe he does some work at safety as well. All right, A+ and A. They did a good job. We'll see if it matters once the season gets here, because again, it's going to come down to Russ Wilson. I think I asked you this, but I'll ask again. We'll ask until I can make it happen. Assuming Russ is healthy for 17 games, he's starting every game.
Oh my God! Why do you continually ask this? Yes.
Okay, I don't want to make sure you didn't change your mind. Just need to know. I think Steelers fans
texting me at night about is Russell Wilson going to start 17 games? It's starting to get a little obnoxious.
You know what else is
obnoxious? If you text me one more time at 2 a.m. about Spencer Rattler and how he got screwed in the draft, I can't take it anymore.
You know what else is obnoxious? Jared Goff just got paid. That's not obnoxious. He's now the second highest paid quarterback in terms of average annual value, just behind Joe Burrow. That's not obnoxious, but I was looking at the list. Like 6th on the list is Russ Wilson, and all that money is being paid by the Broncos. And I'm sure that's not something that the Broncos like to look at, but I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that. All right. I mentioned the NFC North. Rick, I'm going to take a quick break, and you're going to take one with me. When we come back, we'll hit the NFC North, which also has an A+ grade. We'll find out who it is right after this.
From the world of Sonic the Hedgehog, is there anyone stronger?
No.
Tougher?
No.
Hungrier?
Grapes was an interesting choice for someone who doesn't use fingers.
Knuckles, now streaming only on Paramount Plus.
All right, Rick, let's start with the Chicago Bears. I mean, you talk about a team that has gone from outhouse to penthouse. It feels like this team has done that in the span of about 3 weeks, and we have really no idea who they're going to be.
Yep, on paper.
On paper.
Great. Yep.
So it's not hard to be excited about Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. Kieran Amagaje was an interesting pick because he's developmental left tackle. Suffered an injury last year, didn't play a lot for Yale. They got a punter, Torrey Taylor. They only had 4 picks in this draft. They got a punter, which prompted Caleb Williams to text him and say, we're not going to need you a lot next season. And then they came back into the draft to get Austin Booker, the edge rusher out of Kansas, who we had a chance to speak with at the combine, who at 6'6", 245, I think is a little lighter than we thought. Didn't test quite as well as we were hoping for, and he's probably developmental, right?
Yeah, I think this will be a developmental guy. I still think they need to get some edge help, and I think they'll look for that as they go through this process in the offseason. But they were aggressive putting together. I don't know. And Ryan, you can disagree with me or not, and I don't care if you do or you don't. But this is a really nice opportunity for Caleb Williams to walk in and to have the talent on offense, which we're saying the Chicago Bears offensive talent around him.
I do not disagree at all. We've talked about this before. Best case scenario for any quarterback that I can remember, especially first overall pick. Maybe Patrick Mahomes had walked into a better situation.
No, he didn't have to play.
That's right. Okay, if they had to play, then right, that's different. I don't know who else would even be in the conversation. When Peyton Manning started, they won 3 games and he threw 500 interceptions because that team was terrible.
Right.
Maybe Andrew Luck, but that team sucked though. That's why they got him. So he actually did a lot to help that team. They weren't nearly as well prepared as this Bears team feels like.
No, and I think they're set up for success if, like I said, on paper, they look like they're going to be a 10-win game for me. And I think they'll be potential wild card. I don't know if they're going to top the Detroit Lions or not. But with the way they played defense last year, once Matt Eberflus took over the defensive play calling, that in the new offense, It'll be interesting to see if this offense is built around Caleb Williams' skill set and how they implement all these weapons to fit around Caleb Williams.
They got DeAndre Swift in the offseason to help with the run game. Khalil Herbert's still there. Rashawn Johnson, last year's fourth-round pick, I believe, is also still there. I'll just point to this. And we had a lot of conversations throughout the draft process about Caleb Williams, his dad. Are they going to be a problem collectively for whichever team drafts him? We talked to Caleb at the combine, and I joke about this all the time. I don't know if you know the story, Harry, but Caleb's a big ginger ale guy. So Debo got Rick and
ginger ale.
Oh, what is it? Ginger beer. Sorry. Rick's also a ginger beer snob. That's why he had to interject there. So Rick and Caleb shared a ginger beer, and Rick would never pick up his empty can. He would just leave it there. Caleb, at the end of the interview, Harry said, he grabbed his can, which was on the ground. He said, "Where can I put this? I don't want to leave this here." And Rick said, "Just throw it on the ground. Don't worry about it. Debo will get it." Rick didn't say that. But I think that just is an indication that, okay, maybe he understands that he's a human living in a world with other humans and he can act like a normal person. And I mentioned that, Rick, because Shane Waldron was asked about Caleb after their first few practices, and he called him an unbelievable human being. You might say, well, he has to say that. Well, he doesn't have to say anything. He could just say he's doing fine on the football field. And he said football is part of what makes him special, but there's a lot more outside of that which makes him special as well. And it feels like when you read comments from his teammates, both young and old, they seem to buy into the fact that he's the leader and he can handle it and all those other things you might worry about when you bring in a young player.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the whatever hoopla to create media headlines about a player. But these guys spend so much time with these kids, especially if he's going to be the number 1 overall pick, that you should have a pretty good feel for who the kid is as a personality. And, they made a decision. This is our franchise changing quarterback, the face of the organization. Is this the guy we want? And there was no hesitation. I don't believe in them taking him number 1 overall this year.
No, I mean, if I said, I'm just guessing here, if they knew by the combine that Caleb was their guy, that wouldn't be a surprise. That's not too early, right?
No, they knew it during the season.
Well, wait. Pete said he wasn't very good.
Yeah, Pete's. Yeah. Let's move on. It's not the Pete show.
Move on. Also worth noting, Thomas Brown, who was the OC in Carolina, is now the passing game coordinator in Chicago. He said about Rome Odunze, their number 9 overall pick, the wide receiver to Washington, who we love talking to as well at the combine. He said he was his second favorite interview of the combine after Caleb Williams. Also worth noting, Chris Beatty is the wide receivers coach there. He was the wide receivers coach with the Chargers regime with Brandon Staley there. So he's seen Mike Williams. He's seen Keenan Allen, who is now in Chicago. He's worked with DJ Moore, and he's going to be working with Rome Odunze, and I think that's going to be good for both Rome and Caleb as well. So just something to keep an eye on as we talk about this Bears team. You gave an A. Was this your favorite draft class, Rick, or one of your favorites?
One of my favorites.
I gave an A+. They were my number 1 draft class, somehow surpassing the Steelers. So I have to recreate those. But it's hard to be too upset. I mean, maybe the Kieran Amagaji thing is a developmental pick, which I understand because their offensive line is pretty young and pretty good. But are you okay with this? Number 1 and number 2, would you have rather had an edge rusher at number 9?
Yeah, I think if there was an edge rusher available, I may have looked at that. But I think everybody's looking at this kid's upside. Remember, Yale only played 4 games, had the quad injury. I don't know if it was surgically repaired or not. Couldn't compete down at the Senior Bowl. Couldn't do anything through the pre-draft process. I don't think he's practicing yet. I think they're trying to get him ready for training camp. So, but this kid, physically, he has everything you're looking for. Just how long is it going to take him to connect all the dots?
All right, I'll ask you this quickly, and then we'll move on. So, as I mentioned, Kieran Amagaje went the 11th pick in the 3rd round. The very next pick, would you rather, Rick, Kieran Amagaje, or would you rather had edge rusher out of Utah, Jonah Ellis, who went to the Broncos?
Yeah, I don't know. I like Jonah Ellis as a situational pass rusher. I don't think he's an every down player.
Yeah.
I think Chicago was trying to solidify that offensive line, especially with Caleb Williams. So I think that, but you're talking about a kid that played at a lower level that only played 4 games. So you're really betting on your research and betting on the kid, betting on your offensive line coach that you can develop this kid.
All right, I get it. Next up, Detroit Lions. You had to give them an A. There's no way you could have given them a B. You gave an A. I gave them an A minus. So you gave the your extra plus minus came by way of the nepotism grade. They had a good draft. Terry and Arnold was their first round pick. And then we talked about the Ravens doubling up at the cornerback position. The Lions did the exact same thing. In round 2, they got Ennis Rakestraw Jr. We talked to both of those young men at the combine. And Rick, you know Terry and really well. And then in round 4, I think this is where the minus came in for me. They got Gio Manu, the after tackle out of British Columbia. And whatever, you take a developmental guy in round 4. I don't care about that. But let's start here, Rick, because they traded next year's 3rd round pick to go get Manu. And typically that's the price of poker. You have to give up a 1 round earlier pick in next year's draft to get this year's draft pick.
Yep.
So if he's developmental and he could be raw, I haven't seen him, so I don't know. That's you really love this kid, it sounds like.
Well, just similar that we just talked about the Chicago offensive tackle.
Yep.
I think this kid fits in that a little bit. Unique size and athleticism. You got to remember, this was a future pick as well, and developmental pick, because Decker is getting ready to come up. They did lock in Penny Sewell. What makes Detroit so good is their offensive line, who, to me, they have one of the best offensive lines, in the NFL, is why they've been so successful. So this is a kid that they're probably going to bring along and develop, and hopefully be an eventually replacement for Decker as he ages out or phases out.
So they also got Sione Vaki in round 4, and I think they have him listed as, is he still listed as a running back? Let me double check here. He is. He's listed as a running back right now. He played safety, of course, also at Utah. Makai Wingo in round 6, defensive lineman that we've talked about through the draft process, saw him at the pro day in LSU a few weeks ago. And then Christian Mahogany, the guard out of Boston College in round 6. We thought he might go a little higher as well. A couple things here. I saw this quote from Terry Arnold after they started rookie minicamp. And tell me if you're surprised by this quote. You may have already seen it.
No, I'm not surprised.
You will not be. He said, if my mom were a receiver, I'd jam her in the dirt, and she knows that. That sounds like Terrion, doesn't it?
Yeah, just like I would trade my mom for a 7th round, and she knows that.
That's why you guys are kindred spirits. So he talked about he and Ennis having competition, because they're both rookies. They're both high drafted. They both play the same position, and they're going to help that secondary. The other thing that I thought was interesting, I want to ask you about, I mentioned Jared Goff got his new deal, 4-year, $212 million extension, $170 million guaranteed. And I was looking at Spot Track, number 2 in terms of average annual value behind Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's at $55 million, Jared's at $53 million per year. But this is what I want to ask you about, Rick. I know you did, but I'm going to ask you anyway, just for the purpose of the conversation. In terms of the percentage of the cap, in terms of average annual value, Jared Goff is second. He takes up nearly 21% of the cap. And you might say that's a lot, and it does sound like a lot. But here are the other guys in the top 5, and you can tell me whether these teams are good or not. Joe Burrow is number 1, and then Justin Herbert's 3, Lamar Jackson's 4, and then Jalen Hurts is 5. All those teams are competitive. They've been to Super Bowls, had a chance to win Super Bowls. So are you okay with 21 percentage points going towards the quarterback?
If you have a quarterback, you have no choice now.
Yeah.
So it's you just have to figure out how you're going to make the rest of the pieces fit around the quarterback. So I don't know if Justin Herbert would be put up there yet. Not that he's not a talented quarterback, but that's the one team that really hasn't been in contention to say, that they were Super Bowl bound. So I'm just listening to your statement. And when you say that with Justin Herbert, I don't know if he fit in with Joe Burrow yet. Maybe they will now. So
no, he's the outlier when you look at this list, because they have certainly underachieved. I don't even think he has a winning record, or he may be one game over 500 over his career. But then that's even more, I don't want to call it pressure, but I'm guessing you vocalized the conversations during this time of year, or maybe a few weeks from now, where when you're having the conversations about scouting. This is why it's important that we got to nail the draft, because we have so much tied up in our quarterback.
Yeah, no, you have to fill around. And then they were able to extend Amar St. Brown.
That's right.
Penei Sewell, they extended. So you can structure these contracts so it fits underneath your cap. But those are the rest of the. That's why you draft well, which Detroit to me and Brad Holmes is one of the best draft analysts, or if you want to call him. Well, yeah, because you said he'll be on this podcast because with
He's
me
doing too well.
pretty soon. But I think they draft very well, and the players they draft end up playing, and they become bargains until you have to pay them.
Also interesting as I go through these teams and look at the trades they make, the Lions are incredibly aggressive during draft weekend in terms of trading up and what they're willing to give up. We talked about the Gio Manu trade that cost them next year's third for a fourth. That's not necessarily uncommon, but they traded from 29 to 24 to go get Terry and Arnold, and they had to give up a 2024 third round pick in addition to that, and they got a seventh round pick in exchange. But that does that feel about right? That's a lot of third round pick to go up 5 spots.
Well, again, who were they jumping? Green Bay.
Yeah,
Needed a corner.
Okay.
Potentially have taken a corner as well there.
So
and they know where their football team is right now. They're not in the rebuild mode. They needed to improve that secondary. So you're going to be a little bit more aggressive going after players that you think can come in and compete and help you win right away. And I think both Arnold and Rakestraw definitely have the ability to do that because that was, if you had to pick one spot that may be in their weakness, it would have been, the back end or the secondary. And Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell addressed it aggressively this year because of where they're at as a football team.
yeah, and maybe Lions fans or just folks in the media might wonder why they didn't get help at edge rush opposite Aiden Hutchinson. They do have Marcus Davenport, who's battled injuries throughout his career. They have John Pascal, who I liked a lot coming out of Kentucky. I don't want to call him developmental. I think he had an injury early on. They have Houston, who is a sort of situational pass rusher. I think you would agree with that, right?
Yeah, and he had 8 sacks in 7 games.
Yeah.
When he first came in last year, he was hurt the whole year, so they're hopefully banking on him coming back and being as productive as he showed his rookie year if he can stay healthy.
Oh, by the way, I got ahead of myself when I said we would talk about producer Harry's Dolphins. That'll be on our next show. Sorry. So if you're waiting to hear the AFC East, Harry, you got to wait one more day. So that's on me. My bad. All right. A- for me, A for Rick. Rick wouldn't be able to go to the Thanksgiving if he didn't give an A. I get it. Next up, Green Bay Packers. I gave an A. And Rick, as a division rival, gave him a B. I'm guessing it starts with Jordan Morgan.
Yes. I wasn't as big a fan as Jordan Morgan as where he got drafted, to be honest with you.
So 30, just a shade under 33 inches are his arms, and that's basically the cutoff when you're trying to figure out right tackle, left tackle, or you're moving inside. He's currently listed as left tackle. David Bakhtiari is obviously no longer with the Packers. Andre Dillard is also there, but he didn't work out in Tennessee or prior stops with the Eagles. So Tyler Guyton was still there, I believe. Let me double check. And you would have taken Tyler Guyton over.
Yes.
Tyler Guyton was, in fact, still there. Okay, so yeah. And the interesting thing about Tyler Guyton, and we'll talk about the Cowboys on the next show, they're talking about moving him to left tackle. He's not a left tackle. So these are conversations that the teams have clearly had, but just for table that. So Jordan Morgan, you'd have taken Tyler Guyton there. Edge Cooper, they went in round 2. I like that pick. Javon Bullard, they think is going to have a chance to start. You and I both like Javon Bullard. You were talking about him last year in the summer scouting series, so I have to give you credit for that. Marshawn Lloyd has a chance to play as well, the running back they drafted in the next in round 3. And they have A.J. Dillon. They moved on from Aaron Jones.
Yeah, they signed a pretty good running back, too, in free agency.
They got Jacobs.
Yeah,
Josh Jacobs as well. So he's there too. And I think A.J. Dillon's in the last year of his deal. So the Marshawn Lloyd thing, you understand on that level. Tyron Hopper is another linebacker. He's a juiced-up guy from Missouri that I liked a lot. They traded up for Evan Williams. I'll double-check, but I'm pretty sure I made that note. They did, in fact, trade up for Evan Williams around 4. And then they got more depth along the offensive line with Jacob Monk, the guard out of Duke. And then I'll mention, lastly, our guy, Keaton Oladipo, the safety out of Oregon State. A little stiff, but he's closer to the line of scrimmage thumper type. And then, of course, Michael Pratt in round 7 to get another quarterback on the roster here. So other than the Jordan Morgan thing, you probably felt pretty good about this class, you think?
Yeah, I thought it was all those are very steady passionate, good football players. I just put a B because I would have taken Guyton probably over Jordan Morgan.
The defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley, said of Javon Bullard, by the way, Hafley tried to recruit Bullard to BC back in the day when he was there. Loved his tape, loved the way he played, loved the play style, loved the versatility. All basically reading Rick's scouting report. You're welcome, Jeff.
How about the last pick in the 7th round?
Oh, my gosh.
Last year
I'm
in
glad
the
you brought that up.
Summer scouting series, we had him as one, maybe the top 5 corners. And talk about a kid that had really fallen off the radar from where we saw last summer. So it'll be interesting to see if this ends up being a steal or not because of how we saw him a year ago before entering his season.
Kalen King, the cornerback out of Penn State. You would catch glimpses of him while watching Joey Porter Jr. in 2022. And then his season in 2023. It was one of those things, Rick, where I don't know the details of what's going on with the player, but my first inclination when they fall off is like, okay, they must be injured, and they're just trying to play through it. And I didn't hear anything about that. I didn't ask. So maybe that's something, and maybe the injuries lingered. But we just saw Eric All, the tight end, get drafted much higher than I thought, even though he has a torn ACL. So I don't – what could the possible explanation be, person who's been in the NFL for 30-plus years, as to how you fall off like that if you're not chronically injured?
Yeah, I think it started with the Marvin Harrison Jr. matchup in the Ohio State game.
Okay.
Then it started with a poor Senior Bowl where then it started with not a very athletic workout, to say the least, at the combine. So he spiraled the other way. I think if he would have had a really good Senior Bowl and if he would have knocked out the pre-draft process, he probably would have went higher.
Yep.
You know, I'm not saying Friday, but higher on Saturday. But he never could get out of that downward spiral, starting from the beginning of the season till the 255th pick in the 7th round. And
that's a good point. It could be simply just above the neck. You could be unable to get out of that spiral because of your lack of confidence. And confidence, and you know better than I do, that's a real thing in the NFL.
Especially a corner.
Right, exactly. Especially a corner, quarterback, wide receiver, doesn't matter. And the other side of that conversation is Tez Walker, who didn't play a lot because of the stuff we talked about. And then he dropped every pass in the Senior Bowl, and then he bounced back nicely. He had a really good – if you saw those two players, you would know they're the same person at the Senior Bowl and the Pro Day.
Yep.
And Kalen – and he's also ran the 4.3s. Kalen ran in the 4.6s, I believe, so that didn't help. Bigger surprise that Michael Pratt lasted till the 7th round or that Kalen King lasted till pick 255?
Both. I don't know. That's a –
It's like you fell down there. What happened?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. I'm surprised that both lasted that long.
They were both very surprising. And Michael Pratt had a good Senior Bowl. I thought he had it. We talked to people.
I think we went earlier. So.
Yeah. He had a good his pro day was the day before the LSU pro day, and we heard good things about that. All right. A from me, A- B from Rick. Excuse me. One last team to go here. Team that you may have heard of, Rick. The Minnesota Vikings. So we've talked about this to death too. They only had to move up one spot to get J.J. McCarthy. They didn't have to give up their second first-round pick, so that's a win. They got J.J. at 10. But they did trade up from 23 to 17 to get Dallas Turner, and that cost them a pretty penny. And I'll spoiler alert you here right now. As we look ahead to 2025, they still have their first-round pick. Thank goodness they could keep that. They don't have a second. They don't have a third. They don't have a fourth. So the second was traded to Houston when they traded back into the first round to get the pick number 23 back in March. The third round pick, they traded to Jacksonville for Dallas Turner. And the fourth round pick was also traded to Jacksonville for Dallas Turner. So this has to hit in the Will Anderson sort of way, but Dallas Turner could end up being a better player. Then they got Kyrie Jackson in round 4, the long cornerback, and they filled out the roster with some depth and got a kicker, Will Riker, as well, out of Alabama with round 6. So you gave this a B, Rick. I gave it an A, working from the assumption that they save money, draft picks, whatever, just moving it one spot for JJ. And then if Dallas Turner hits, he feels a huge need.
Yeah, if he can hit, and I think he's going to be a really good pro, it'd be an A, but they have a lot of draft capital gone for 2025 draft. Yep. So when you're reaching into the 2025 draft, especially a 3rd and 4th rounder, and if Dallas Turner ends up being unique as an edge rusher, being a Myles Garrett type, then who cares? I don't know if we want to see that. But that will be determined on how Dallas Turner ends up. And I think he is a great fit in Flores, but they also were aggressive to get Grenard from Houston in the offseason, Van Ginkel from Miami. So you can see they're starting to try to get the physical attributes of edge rushers to fit Flores' defense. And they had to replace some pretty good edge rushers, especially Daniil Hunter, who ended up in Houston.
You mentioned Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator. Dallas was asked about Brian Flores, and he said the way he runs things reminds him a lot of Nick Saban in terms of no nonsense. He said, you can tell that he definitely doesn't play no games. Turner said of Brian Flores, he's all about business and handling business. I'm about the same thing. And that's probably one of the benefits of playing in Alabama for Nick Saban. It's not going to be, let me hold your hand and help you through this process. It's going to be a battle of attrition.
Yes. Yeah, you're doing it this way or the highway.
Or you're not. All right. So I'm guessing you gave him the B because of the uncertainty with the next year's draft, and you don't know what you're getting in Dallas Turner trade up just yet.
Yeah. No, I think he's going to be a really good player for him. It'll be interesting to see what JJ ends up being.
That's true too.
So those are two big swings that could either be A+ draft or could be redrafting later and not being an A+ draft.
I know you don't like to talk about it, but I'm going to ask you anyway because it's a podcast and people want to hear your thoughts. Week 1, JJ McCarthy, where's he on the depth chart?
I don't know yet. How do I know that until you get through the OTAs, until you get
It's
through?
your job to guess, Rick. That's what you're doing in the media now. You have to guess at these things.
Yeah, I still think that I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know how Sam Darnold has looked. I don't know if they start with Sam Darnold. Ideally, you'd like to start with Sam Darnold.
I agree with that.
And then bring JJ along slowly. That'd be the ideal scenario.
I agree. If you do that in this division, well, you can win with Sam Darnold. I think I want to see how Sam Darnold looks in a competent offense. He didn't get a chance to play really for Kyle Shanahan, so we'll find out together. All right, that's it. We hit every team unless I missed one. And I apologize to producer Harry for getting his hopes up about the Dolphins. We did talk about Mr. Van Ginkel, though, so hopefully that will suffice. But don't worry, Rick. We'll be back later this week to talk about the NFC and AFC East, and that will wrap up our revisitation of the 2024 draft. I think we can finally put it to bed after that. And we'll have some more stuff coming up next week, and summer scouting will be here before you know it. That's a wrap on episode 158. Remember, leave us a 5-star review, a mailbag question. We'll get to those things later this summer. Thanks as always to my guy, Rick. Thanks to Harry for producing. Thanks to all you guys who watch, listen, and comment. We'll be talking AFC and NFC East later this week. See you guys.